Okay, so we're talking about completing the square and solving the equation. So you might want to pause this video and maybe take a screenshot or write down all these steps of what we're going to do. I'll take you through them as we work out the problem. This isn't just the completing the square steps, but it's solving it all the way down to the end. So the completing the square part, we need to get rid of this last term because it's not a perfect square. So we want to add 5 to both sides. Well, when we add 5 to both sides, this cancels out here. And we have this problem now. So we have 3p squared minus 6p equals 5. Now, because there is a coefficient on the first term other than 1, we want to go ahead and get rid of that. And since it's multiplying p, so to get rid of it, we're going to divide by 3. So we'll divide everything in the problem by 3. So now what we have is p squared minus 2p equals 5/3. So now to complete the square, so I did the first thing, remove the last term, and then if the first number on the first term is anything but 1, then we divide everything, which we did, we divide by 3. So now we're going to take half of the middle term. So half of the middle term, half of -2 is -1, and we're going to square that. So -1 times -1 equals +1. So we're going to square, it says take half of the middle term, square that answer, which was -1, and then add it to both sides. So we're going to add 1 to both sides of the equation. So we get +1 here and +1 here. Now 1 in this case means 3/3. 1 plus 5/3 is the same as saying 5/3 plus 3/3, because 3/3 is 1. So we get equals 8/3 here. All right, so now we have p squared minus 2p plus 1 equals 8/3. So now that we have done that, we're going to factor the left side. So this becomes the set that's a perfect square, and what's in here will be a p, and whatever was half of that middle term. So if it was a +1, we would put +1. But since this was a -1, then we'll put -1. Let me repeat that. When you factor this set, what goes in here is the square root of the first term for that first spot, and then whatever half of the middle term was goes here. And you can check that. If you FOILed that, you would end up back at this spot right here. So now we have equals 8/3. All right, so we factored the left side. Now we're going to square root both sides of the equation, making sure that the one on the right says plus or minus. So when you square root this side, it just is whatever's inside, p minus 1. When you do the square root of 8 over the square root of 3, oops, sorry. That one we're going to have to work on a little bit because you can't leave this radical in the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rationalize this a minute. I'm going to take the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. And then I'll have to do that on the top too, but I'm doing it on the bottom so we don't have a radical here. So I have now the square root of 24 on top and the square root of 9 on the bottom, which can be solved. Square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 24, we're going to have to simplify that. It's made up of some things. Look at number 24. It has some numbers in it that you can find the square root of it when you look at the factors of it. So here's all the factors of 24. Do you notice any of them that you can easily find the square root? The only one I know is this one right here. So we're going to break this 24 up into the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. And we solve that part. Square root of 4 is 2. And square root of 6 goes inside because it couldn't be solved, that part. So now what we have is p minus 1 equals plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6, that was the top part, square root of 24, over 3. So we squared both sides of the equation, or square rooted it, excuse me, and then we finished that up. Now we're ready to solve for the variable. So we want p alone, so we're going to add 1 to both sides of the equation. So now we have p equals 1 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 over 3. Now that 3 is not underneath the 1. The 1 was being added. It's not 1/3, it's just 1. So the 3 would not be underneath there. So now our equation then is 1 plus 2 square root of 6 over 3 and 1 minus 2 square root of 6 over 3. We can't reduce the 6 and the 3 because they're not. When you reduce them, you have to reduce things that are the same, and this isn't square root of 6. So we can't reduce it. If it was square root of 3, then we could think about it, but it's not. So we can't reduce that. If we could, we would reduce these two. They're both just regular numbers, but since there's nothing in common in 2/3, that's the final answer.